Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. America First with Sebastian Gorka, today at 3, right before Sean Thompson at 4 on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan, and Amy is out this morning with a family matter. Our former colleague here at AM 560, Steve Cortes, he did the afternoon show, you'll recall, was a senior advisor to President Trump's 2016 and 2020 campaigns. But yesterday, he posted an op-ed in Newsweek that gave 3 reasons why he is now an advisor to the pro-Ron DeSantis super PAC Never Back Down. Cortez wrote, Governor Ron DeSantis represents the best possible option to win the presidency in 2024 and to govern as a highly capable, patriotic, populist leader. As you can imagine, that is not sitting too well in MAGA world. He is, Cortez now, from just a little smattering of what I saw on Twitter, getting the Mike Pence treatment and then some. So for a deeper explanation on why Steve decided to move to Ron DeSantis in 2024, please be joined by Steve Cortes. Steve, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you so much for having me. Please don't ever put me in a bucket with Mike Pence. That's not where I am ideologically or temperamentally.
Wow.
And by the way, I'm curious, did Amy take the morning off because she didn't want to have to stomach somebody switching sides and being in favor of Ron DeSantis? I hope that was a bit of the cause.
She's ashamed of you. She's in the Bannon camp. What is it? Did Steve Bannon say you sold your soul for 30 pieces of silver? Boy, a Benedict Arnold accusation from Bannon. Were you surprised by the heat you're taking from Trump loyalists?
I guess I'm surprised at the intensity of it. I mean, I obviously knew there would be backlash, but I'm surprised at the extent of the vitriol. Particularly, I think that there's something revealing in that, though, as well. And listen, here's the thing. I am not turning into some never Trump person, okay? As I stated in the article, I'm trying to state in my interviews, I'm very proud of the work I've done on behalf of Trump and the America First movement. I was honored to work for him. I think I was one of his strongest and most dedicated defenders for many years. But I never signed a blood oath until death. And I don't have loyalty to him or to any politician. I have loyalty to the country and to the cause. And I firmly believe, just as I think Trump was very necessary in 2016, he was the disruptor we needed, I believe that now, in 2023, into 24, the leader we need is Ron DeSantis. And that's why I wanted to write this article, though, to lay out, in evidence-based, data-based terms, why I believe he can, A, win, and then, B, translate that win into effective conservative governance once in office. And if that's going to make people who still love Trump, react sort of viscerally at me, I think that says a lot more about them, frankly, than it does about the arguments I'm making. I'm trying to have a very rational argument, and this is why we're going to have a primary. I believe Ron DeSantis will win that primary. I know it doesn't look like it right now, but I believe he will. But I can promise you this, whoever wins that primary will absolutely be a better choice than Joe Biden, who's an absolute unmitigated disaster. But I believe the best chance to beat Biden, the best chance to right this ship that is listing in the United States is not starting to sink. In my view, that best option is Governor Ron DeSantis.
Before we get to your arguments, did you have a conversation with former President Trump about this?
I did. I'm not going to share the details on that, but you can imagine it didn't go very well.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine. I think it's pretty clear how much of a premium he puts on loyalty, right? I mean, what his perception of loyalty is. I'm not saying you're being disloyal.
Yeah. But can we talk about that for a moment, though?
Sure.
I think this is an important point. Again, I'm loyal to the country. But when it comes to President Trump, he loves to throw around the term loyalty, yet he constantly trashes people who used to work for him, who he selected, right, for the most senior positions of government, right? So it seems that when he throws the word loyalty, what he really means is one-way fealty, okay, to him. And again, I'm not getting into this to trash President Trump because I think he did some great, really necessary things for the country and for American politics. I also believe that everyone in life has their time when they are most useful and has their season, as it were. And I think that his season politically is spent. It's over. I think the evidence shows us that, not just my opinion, but the recent massive election losses show us that we have the right agenda, but we don't necessarily have the right leadership and tactics to persuade the American people on that agenda.
Well, let's go to your arguments then. The first argument you make is we've seen the Biden-Trump movie already and no one likes it. So explain that, because, I mean, that runs counter to some of the polling out, including yesterday from Morning Consult, that shows Trump among Republican primary voters 61-19 over DeSantis.
Yes, listen, I do have a lot of problems with that poll, but admittedly not a good one for DeSantis. I'd also say it's very early, A. B, Ron DeSantis is not yet in the race. And then C, most importantly, it's not a national race. That's not how primaries work. It's state by state. And even the state polls, where DeSantis is down, significantly in some of these state polls, it's a much smaller margin in the state polls. So I would caution people that we've got a long, long way to go, regarding those polls. But the thing is, that poll, though, doesn't speak to what I think is the reality as reflected by a lot of polls. I'm not just cherry-picking one or two that show us the supermajority of Americans in the 70% range don't want Biden to run, in the 70% range don't want Trump to run. And again, this is from many, many well-done, credible polls. And by the way, you can't get, in this polarized era we're in, you can't get 70% of Americans to agree that this is the month of May, right? But Americans are the preponderance of Americans say, I don't want either one of these guys. And my point there is, we are better as a country than this. We should not have to choose between two incredibly unliked, very polarizing men, both of whom are in very advanced age, both of whom have already had a bite at this apple and come up short in several different ways. That should not be the option presented in the greatest country in the history of the world with 330 million people, where we can find somebody far more capable, far more inspiring, with a far better record. And I believe that person is Ron DeSantis. So my message to folks, my argument to folks is we can do better than this. As a country, we are better than this. The best way to break this logjam that no one seems to want, this movie we've already seen, the best way to do it is to make DeSantis the Republican nominee.
How important is it to you was the generational shift here, moving down and getting out of candidates in their 70s and 80s and to candidates in their 40s like DeSantis, that it's time for a new generation of Republicans to lead the party? How persuasive was that to you?
Listen, I think it's certainly a factor. And I want to be super respectful, because there are plenty of people in their 70s and 80s who are working hard, as alert as they've ever been. And that obviously happens. And thankfully, with added longevity, that's happening at later and later ages. So age itself is certainly not disqualifying. But we certainly see in Joe Biden a man where age has been vicious to him. And by the way, that's not his fault. There's plenty of things I will fault him for. I won't fault him for losing his cognitive ability. It's not his fault, but he clearly has. Okay, and I think anyone who's honest knows that. It's reasonable to also suspect that Donald Trump, though he seems very healthy right now, it's reasonable to suspect that somebody of his age may have those problems similarly, once into his 80s. That's not an unfair risk to assess. And then clearly, if you look at Ron DeSantis, we have something very much the opposite. But again, I don't want age itself necessarily to be the measure or the barometer, but I do believe that you have this rising star, energetic, fresh leader who has proven by his record, not just by social media pronouncements or loud banter, but he's proven by his record that he can move a state, a very major state, from being a swing state to a ruby red, dependably conservative Republican state. And he did it through really competent governance. And I think it's absolutely key. And to me, if we have a man in Ron DeSantis with essentially the same agenda as Donald Trump, the America First agenda, but we have it in a young, dynamic leader who is not nearly as polarizing, particularly for independents and suburbanites and voters that we need to reach, why would we not opt for this shift? To me, this makes eminent sense.
Why do you think? And I'm a huge DeSantis fan too. He's done an incredible job in Florida, but there is still that question when he gets on the national stage: how does he translate his success in Florida to be attractive to the same demographics nationally as he is in Florida? That it doesn't always translate because the people who live in the other 49 states haven't experienced Ron DeSantis and the impacts of his policies on a daily basis.
Yeah, listen, it's a great and very valid question, because you're exactly correct. Just because you were a very good governor doesn't mean necessarily that you can translate that nationally in terms of selling the American people on your vision. And I think two things are significant. One is and I think kind of to your point maybe, most Americans don't really know who Ron DeSantis is. I mean, sure, they know the name and so forth, but if they don't live in Florida, they're not really familiar with his story. But his life story, which I think is incredible, his biography, his sterling resume, his amazing family, all of that. But then even more importantly, what he's done as governor. We're going to tell that story, though, and that story is going to start to be told in earnest once he actually declares. I firmly believe that we're going to have the resources and the people to tell that story. And I think once we tell it to people, we're going to start persuading them. But then the second element here, which I think is transferable, is if we look at Miami-Dade County, generally, before DeSantis, elections in Florida were sort of South Florida versus the rest of the state. A lot of ways like Chicago versus downstate Illinois, right? But just flip the geography. And with South Florida being very dependently left and Democratic and blue, and then was the rest of the state enough to sort of compensate? Well, DeSantis changed that entirely. If we look at Miami-Dade County, the biggest county in Florida, 1 in 10 Floridians live there, more than that. He lost it by 21% in 2018. It's one of the reasons he narrowly won in 2018 is he got crushed in Miami-Dade, like most Republicans, in diverse urban and suburban areas. But what did he do in 4 years? He moved the needle 31%. He won it by 10%. He won it by a comfortable margin in a normally, historically blue district that is incredibly black and Hispanic and suburban and urban. And that tells me if you can do that in Miami-Dade, that's not peculiar to Miami-Dade. You can do that all over the country. And I believe that that is the model that we should be looking for in terms of how to win because, again, we've got to win, okay? And here's the thing, too, where I was a firm Trump supporter all the way until November of 22. And I just said, look, we've got to be honest with ourselves. We lost in 2018, we lost in 2020, and we lost in 22, at least compared to expectations, right, where we should have soared given how weak Biden was, and we did. And I think all of that says we need to recalibrate our approach. Again, not our agenda, not our philosophy. And that's why I think Ron DeSantis is more conservative, is further to the right, is more populist than Donald Trump. But admittedly, they're similar in terms of agenda. But they're not similar in terms of temperament and record.
When DeSantis gets in, I mean, is he going to be ready, willing, and able to go blow for blow with Trump? I mean, sort of veiled references to outsourcing the management of COVID to Tony Fauci as compared to what he did in the state of Florida. I'm not sure those are going to be enough. He's going to have to be willing to lodge frontal assaults against Trump, isn't he?
Yes, I think so. I think he'll do it in a measured way. He's not going to wallow in the mud. It's just not his style. It's not who he is. But on substantive arguments, is he going to confront Trump on his weaknesses? Yes, I think he absolutely will and should, and he must if he's going to win, clearly. And here again, that is where there are understandable reservations from a lot of Republicans I've talked to about, can he handle that? Because let's face it, Trump is a master pugilist, right? He is. It's one of the reasons that he was president of the United States. And so not easy to do political battle in that arena with him. But do I think Ron has both the record as well as the mettle, the personal mettle to do that? I do. And I think this man who was a naval officer, who played college sports, who as governor was willing to take on the most powerful, high-profile company in his state in Walt Disney, is continuing to take them on. Do I think he has both the knowledge and the guts to do that? I think he does. And you mentioned COVID. That's certainly one example where what I have suggested to Governor DeSantis, we'll see what he does, is I think juxtapose Dr. Ladapo, who is the Surgeon General of Florida, with Tony Fauci, who Donald Trump, let's face it, largely handed the keys to the country over to Tony Fauci. But let's compare those two. The top medical advisor to DeSantis, who's an absolutely brilliant man, has been thoroughly rational and scientific throughout this entire crisis, helping to make Ron DeSantis make Florida the model for the country of how to handle this virus in a reasonable and rational way. And then compare him to Tony Fauci, who's a megalomaniac tyrant who inflicted unbelievable lasting harm on this country. And we can't escape the fact that he did so largely with the imprimatur of Donald Trump.
Well, you talk about the records and contrasting DeSantis' record to Trump, suggesting DeSantis has a better record. On other than the matter of COVID, which is not insignificant, where else do you see real contrast between DeSantis and Trump?
Yeah. I think in terms of taking on big business, to me that is the most significant difference. Is that, for example, President Trump, while in office, I encouraged him regularly to take on big tech. He was unwilling to in any way, and I think, by the way, big tech largely cost him his election. in 2020 as a consequence. He should have taken them on. It was the right thing to do, but it also would have helped him personally, politically. And then we see Ron DeSantis, somebody who is perfectly willing to take on big business. And it's not just Disney, although that's the highest profile example. But that's another, I think, huge issue for the country that I think too often doesn't get talked about enough in our politics is the role that the oligarchs and the role that the fusion of big business and big government together as a sort of unified force, that role they have played in just diminishing our prosperity, our rights as Americans. And to me, you have in Governor DeSantis somebody who's far more populist in that regard than Donald Trump, and far more willing to take on those forces. So that to me is another key differential. And look, I could go on and on, but I think the biggest difference, frankly, also for a primary, is winning. All right, I mean, it's winning. It's showing that he can take a state that he barely won and then win it by almost 20% 4 years later. Whereas Donald Trump's record lately in midterms and his own election has been not winning, has been losing. And it doesn't matter how great our agenda is if we don't win. There's no substitute for victory, right? We have to win, and then once we win, we have to prove we can build a team, which I would say that's another crucial difference, is Ron DeSantis has shown as governor that he builds a coherent, disciplined team, discipline and focus. So he might not be entertaining, it might not be fun and crazy social media posting, but it's just methodical notching of win after win after win. We know that from his record, and we know quite the opposite on the other side, a record of chaos.
He is Steve Cortes, senior advisor to President Trump's 2016 and 2020 campaigns, now an advisor for the pro-Ron DeSantis PAC, Never Back Down. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, appreciate it, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Signs of spring are upon us. Birds are singing, crocuses are popping up, and your concrete is sinking. Well, Perma Seal can help with that. Hi, I'm Roy Spencer. As you explore your yard this spring, you'll likely see some cracked or sunken concrete, a sidewalk, stoop, driveway, or patio. Perma Seal has the answer for you. Our poly-level solution can raise and level sunken concrete quickly and effectively, putting an end to eyesores and dangerous trip hazards. Call today for a free estimate, 800-421-SEAL. Poly-level is the quickest, least expensive, and most durable system to repair your sunken concrete problems. Don't live with a problem that will only get worse. During the month of April, we're giving $100